I am Madison Timmons.
I'm Chris Susie.
And we're paranormal specialists who live in the most haunted city on earth, Savannah, Georgia. Every day is Halloween in our line of work, so join us as we spin true tales of haunts, murders, and disturbing Savannah history. I'm Madison.
I'm Chris.
And welcome to the most haunted city on earth. Hello, and welcome back to another episode of The Most Haunted City on Earth. My name is Madison Timmons.
I'm Chris Susie.
And I'm JT Timmons.
He finally got it this time. He was ready for it this time.
I was.
And
I
not
was
like,
ready.
And I'm JT. I'm here too. But
is that your impression of
I'm
JT?
here too.
I am country, but I'm not that country,
honey.
honey.
Yosemite Sam kind of feel.
Woohoo! Let's do some ghosts in there.
That's how I perceive JT on a regular basis.
What?
Perfect.
Because he's really excitable. And
That's
then
Turn nations.
well, it's probably because we just had like a conversation about how JT says the word boil very odd.
He does say it like bowl.
Yes,
Boil
and
the water.
Chris was like, "Excuse me."
Well, I was trying to think. Oh, a buller. What is a buller?
Bowler.
Because I was like, maybe it's a cryptid.
The
buller. The buller is out in the woods.
And so,
That's
therefore, JT is Yosemite Sam in my head. It makes a lot of sense, though. The firiness, the red hair.
You get him one of those big hats and two guns.
Exactly. So,
all right, before we get started, I want to thank our new Parajunkies this week. Megan Baker, Ashley Blackman, Michelle Price, Michael Guinu, and Mel Ellis. Thank you so much, seriously. And to all of our Parajunkies, just thank you so much for just sticking with us, and really, we love you all. So welcome to the family, y'all.
yes, welcome to the Parajunkie family. Thank you for enjoying our nonsense and and wanting more of it. We really appreciate you guys. And if you aren't already a Parajunkie and you want to become one, definitely consider doing it because we always have really fun content coming out on there. So you can find us on Patreon under the Savannah Underground.
Yes, we are doing some crazy stuff in season 2 this season. We got a lot of fun stuff coming for you. We're trying out new things. Some might work, some might not. However, one thing we do know works is telling people's ghost stories. People really like to hear us tell the stories and then talk about them. Therefore, Madison, what do we want?
Yes, if you have a ghost story, and you don't have to be a Parajunkie to send it to us. If you just listen to the podcast normally and you have a good ghost story, please send it to us because we want to read our viewers' stories and react to them and kind of chat about what they could be and things like that. So if you've got one, you can DM us on Instagram under The Most Haunted City on Earth, or if you want to email it to us, you can do that as well. You can email it to John Taylor at Red Eye Film Productions.
Yes, an S at the end of Red Eye Film Productions.
Yes. So if you have one, please send it to us and we will read it on the show.
Yes, and John is John, not Jon.
Mm-hmm.
It's probably time that we get a dedicated email.
Yes.
Yeah.
That is true.
You know, honestly, it's not a bad idea.
HauntedCity@gmail.com.
Haunted City, yeah.
Well, we haven't gotten it yet.
Yeah.
So
we'll
send it there.
We'll announce in future episodes. But yeah, no, you're 100%
for right
right.
now, though, Instagram's the best. But if you don't have Instagram for some reason, you can email it to JT.
Yes.
So
Cool. All righty. So this episode, we are talking about haunted houses, our favorite haunted house stories around Savannah, because I guess we realized that there's a lot of haunted houses that we've covered, but there are particular stories that they just haven't come up yet. And so we wanted to kind of like fine tune and exact, that process and just hit some of the stories that we thought about. We're like, oh, we haven't told that one on the podcast. Oh, we haven't told that one on the
Absolutely.
podcast.
And many ghost story haunted houses only have one ghost, and we tend to be focusing on the more elaborate ghosts and the more more, ensconced ghost houses. And when we come back around, it's like, oh, well, there are houses that just have one solid story that kind of defines the house, the ghost.
Absolutely.
Exactly. So I'll kick it off with the Foley House, which is one of my favorite stories just because I think it's very morbid. Morbid. But it basically, the Foley House used to be a boarding house of sorts. So it was run by a woman who, she just ran the house by herself and things like that, Mrs. Foley. And they got like a lot of different characters that would go through the house because, when you have a boarding house, a lot of times you get the snake oil salesman, you get, the sailors or travelers and things like that. So a lot of them good, a lot of them bad. So one night there was a snake oil salesman who came and stayed at the house, and he had a particular interest in Mrs. Foley. She was not about it at all. So she denied his advances and things like that. But that night he tried to sneak into her room. And so he basically tried to take advantage of Mrs. Foley, and she ended up grabbing the nearest object to her bed, and that object ended up being a candelabra. And so she would take it and smash it into the guy's head. So basically, she was left with a dead body, which is not great for business. So
well, little did she know one day.
Yeah, exactly. Right. But at this time, she was like, oh, God, I have a dead body now and I need to get rid of him.
Dead body.
So she did. By the morning, the body was gone. Nobody thought anything of it because he was a snake oil salesman. They were like, oh, he must have just already left town, things like that. Little did anyone know until multiple years later, when they were doing restoration on the home, a body would fall out of the wall with a hole in the center that looked like about candlestick width. I wonder who that could be. And the kicker is that Mrs. Foley's brother was a brick mason. And so he came that night and helped her put the body into the wall, and he patched it up real quick before anybody woke up the next morning. And so that is one of my favorite stories to tell people.
It's a great story. It absolutely is. And the interesting thing is, a lot of that is conjecture.
Yes.
Only because we don't know. We don't have a firm understanding. That's a good representation because we don't even know who the guy is.
Exactly.
They call him Wally because he was bricked up in a wall. That's what they call the ghost, Wally. And they see him. They see this ghost. And what's interesting is the ghost that they see is a man in a top hat, well-dressed, well-to-do. And it turns out that a man, a wealthy businessman, went missing around the same time. And so and there are people who believe that it was even more structured than the story of the attack, because there is some belief that this was a system of gentleman suitor and acquiring his wealth and getting his money and getting his stuff. And it was like, oh, that's an interesting take on the story.
That is an interesting take.
Yeah, because it was fascinating because the story of him being the snake oil salesman is the prolific and most repeated story. But when you go looking for it, you're like, oh, that's interesting because that is what is supposed to happen. But of course, it's not like there was a diary that detailed it all out or even a registry of the people who are staying. So people just figured that was the most likely story. But again, the brother being a bricklayer, coming over and bricking it up in the middle of the night, some people think it might have been a little premeditated. Oh. Because of the speed at which it happened. Oh. Because a lot of people say it happened in one night. The wall went up in one night. And it's like, can you do that like in a panicked call? Okay, all right, I'll just bring some bricks over.
Bricks and
the mortar.
The mortar and all of that.
And do they don't have Home Depot. And do I knock the wall down? Do I, do these things? So it was.
They don't have Home Depot back then, so it's like he has all that just chilling.
Well, he is a mason.
That was his job.
Okay, so I guess he had.
Does he have to spare? Because that's another thing is,
that's true.
Having that much, enough for a wall to spare. And then it's like, was it a cubby? Was it a cubby they walled in? Lots of questions, but I do love the Foley House story because it's so intriguing.
Oh, it's so fun.
It's just like, what? And her name has always been a problem to me.
Yes.
Because it's Honoria or Honoria. It's honor with an IA at the end. So if anybody knows how to pronounce that, because I've been telling that story for going on 25 years. Mm-hmm. And every time I just say Mrs. Foley.
Yeah, that's
because
why
I don't know, because honoria sounds like a digestive disorder.
Exactly.
Oh, he's got a bad case of honoria.
And that's why I always cut it, because
Honoria
sounds beautiful.
Yeah.
And
Honoria.
Honor, we'll name her Honoria.
Honoria.
And
Honoria.
Honoria.
You got a bad case of the Honorias.
Yeah, exactly.
So that was the reason why I ended up cutting her name in general, is because, one, I didn't know how to pronounce it properly, but also I try to avoid giving drunk people even an inch to go off of.
Yeah, that's true.
So it's like, because when you do ghost tours, you deal with a lot of intoxicated people. And if you even slightly hint at anything that could be made into a joke, they'll never let it go. It will be for the rest of your tour.
Right.
I don't give anybody an inch. So
For sure.
It's just way easier to be Mrs. Foley.
So where is the Foley House located?
It's on Chippewa Square, isn't
Yes.
it? Yeah.
Is it really?
Yes.
Yeah, it is. It is also one of the weird things because it's in the row of townhouses on the
west side, on the
southwest side. Yeah.
Yes.
Wow.
Yeah, it's kind of tucked in there.
Like behind the church on the corner there, you can start to see the row of houses. And one of the interesting things about Savannah, the square system, is that each square was supposed to serve as its own like little ward and township. So they had their own responsibilities, and they would have commerce with other squares. That's why there's so many churches in Savannah, is each square seemed to have its own church and congregation. Sure. So the people would live in these little houses down the lane, well, not lanes, the off crops of that central green space that was supposed to be used for agriculture, and now is used for
partying.
Very confusing memorials.
Yes.
It's like, why
is it a private residence, or can you go see it?
No, it's a bed and breakfast.
Yeah, it's still a bed and breakfast.
Yes, we can get the room. Let's go.
Yeah,
that's cool.
Yes.
And does it still have the bricks, like pieces of the brick?
I don't believe so. No,
or where the wall stood. I
think they will point out where it is.
It's like here, but it's like
I haven't been inside the house in maybe 18 years. So I don't know if they've renovated it all, but there was at one time a place where they're like, and this is where the body was found. Because they also are not shy. Or at least they weren't. They weren't shy about it, about ghosts and that story. Because it's a good story. Let's face it. It's a good story because at the very base of it was this really, strong woman who was running her business and took care of business. So,
Exactly.
Not for sure. Did he smell though? Did he stink? That's what I want to know. Like how did she mask that? I mean,
I actually think that
brick,
when you brick something in with mortar and seal it shut, that does a lot to stave off the smell.
Okay.
And also back in the day, everything smelled.
That's what I was going to say.
The horses just doing their business everywhere.
Someone should have told Gacy that.
Jeez. Well, here's the thing though. This happened in the 1800s, so it's, it's going to stink in general. But think about all the other places in Savannah where people were buried in walls and things like that. I really don't.
I love how it's like, think of all the other places in Savannah where people were buried in walls. It's all over the place.
Bodies just hanging out.
Out. The Marshall House. I mean, come on. Why
are we
mini London?
Are haunted by the smell.
Yes.
At the Marshall House. Some people at the Marshall House, one of the things that they will say is that they smell rot. And they smell, this stench. And it's just fleeting. It comes and goes. And it's so weird.
Okay, tell me another.
Okay. So another one, because we've talked about the the Hamilton Turner Inn before, but I got a new story. So this one came to me recently because I mentioned in a previous episode that people just tell me their ghost stories without me asking because they're like, oh, yeah, you're the ghost lady. I'm going to tell you my story. So I was talking to this woman who I'm friends with. She runs a lot of the vintage markets that pop up in Savannah, me being a vintage lady. I go to them all. And so she and I are have had many conversations, but she told me about how before she started her vintage company, she used to work at a lot of the bed and breakfasts in Savannah. So she worked at the Hamilton Turner Inn. Oh. And she was telling me how she never had a problem with the house. Like, yeah, she heard the kids and the pool balls and stuff. She's like, oh, that's true. But she's like, I was never afraid of the house. Like, she's like, there's been places that I've worked where the ghosts scared me, but that was never the one until she got pregnant. Mm-hmm. And so,
oh, yes.
Yeah. And so she got pregnant, and every time she would be at the top of the stairs, she would feel hands on her back. Like it was trying to push her down the stairs. And one time she almost did fall completely, and she had to quit because it would happen to her every time she came to work. And then it got to the point where it was going to be too dangerous because she was so heavily pregnant that she's like, if I fell, it would really do a lot of damage. And so she had to leave the house. No. But I'd never heard another person talk about.
I have.
Oh boy, I'm sure you have.
Oh my gosh. What's really weird is because this was a story that was very difficult to verify and very difficult to understand. So the Hamilton Turner Inn.
I always do that too.
had many different and strange histories. As a matter of fact, if you're familiar with A Midnight in the Garden of Good and Evil, it is the location of Joe Odom and Nancy Hillis, Mandy, if you watch the movie, did a piano bar in the Hamilton Turner Inn. Lots of different things. But one story that came up was that in the lower quarters of this building in the late 1800s, I might have my dates wrong, but there was a period of time when there was a doctor who would perform illegal abortions.
Really?
In that building. So when you said pregnant, I was like, oh no. Because that was a big thing. And the story as it was told, and again, this was one of those things that because I could never find the appropriate information on it, I just kind of tucked it away. But the story goes that he would hang a white curtain in his window when he was in so that women could go in and get their illegal abortions.
Wow.
Yeah, and people say that he performed many because of the rampant sexual assault, because of the rampant, and when you think about how very little resources, especially contraceptive resources of that period, and young women getting pregnant, and a city of immaculate reputation. Like your reputation meant everything in Savannah, and if you were in any way caught in something scandalous, having somebody who would perform that. And again, it was kind of one of those stories that when it comes across your table, you're like, that's an amazing story, but it's a little odd because how do you prove it? How do you find it? It's not like there's going to be a lot of reporting on it, and if there is, what kind of reporting is it? But I do recall the framework of the story was when pregnant women are in that building, they feel threatened. Wow. As if the doctor is still trying to do his job.
Whoa.
I have to tell her that because she's...
Yeah, but that's not the way to do it. Goodness gracious.
Push them down the stairs,
Your brain needs support, and new Ollie Brainy Chews are a delightful way to take care of your cognitive health. Made with scientifically backed ingredients like Thai ginger, L-theanine, and caffeine, Brainy Chews support healthy brain function and help you find your focus, stay chill, or get energized. Be kind to your mind and get these nootropic chews at ollie.com. That's OLLY.com. These statements have not been evaluated by the Food and Drug Administration. This product is not intended to diagnose, treat, cure, or prevent any disease.
Keep in mind that
that's
what resources does he really have, and how much of him is diminished to just a single action of end the pregnancy, end the pregnancy.
Okay, go ahead and plug her business because that was a good story.
So
give her a shout out.
She runs Old Fashioned Bazaar, which is the markets that basically they do pop-up markets multiple times a year and whatnot. They're all themed.
She needs to be a guest.
She does. Yeah, she's really cool. She also owns, what is her particular business? Give me 1 second, y'all. But we'll tag her and things like that. But her main jam is Old Fashioned Bazaar. So definitely follow them on Instagram because they have great Oak Road Vintage. That is her personal vintage.
What is it?
shop.
Okra?
Oak Road.
Oak Road. I was like, Okra Vintage. All right.
Yeah. That's her personal vintage
Cool, Oak
shop
Road.
and stuff. But yeah, it's a great vintage market. They do it all the time. They did one in Moon River, in the basement of Moon River.
The basement of Moon River.
Yeah, Edie was there. If y'all remember Edie, who was one of our very first guests.
We need to
Have her back.
Yes.
We need to bring
What
her
are we
back.
doing?
Yeah.
Season two.
Season 2.
Yes.
She's our highest viewed episode ever.
Well, yeah, because she's
Well,
awesome.
She has an amazing following.
She does.
And if you don't follow her on TikTok, follow her on TikTok. She puts out amazing Savannah ghost
So
content.
good.
Yeah.
So good. That and like what to do in Savannah at that moment.
Just
like she's like a Savannah influencer.
Yeah,
Like,
absolutely.
full blown.
Absolutely.
Yeah, Salt Waves
she's
and
sweet.
Spanish Moss. That's Edie's.
Salt waves and Spanish moss.
TikTok, so definitely follow her.
Yeah.
But yeah, so we'll definitely have our formerly pregnant Hamilton Turner and employee guest.
I also have
on
another
sometime.
Hamilton Turner in story.
Ooh, go ahead.
So in the 80s, it was kind of a place where people would crash, and there was a lot of like transients in the Hamilton Turner Inn. And one story was about a friend of mine who spent a couple of weeks living there, and she would say that when she went to sleep, the bed would shake.
Oh.
And it was one of those things where at first she thought it was a question of like loose, bolts or something. But after a time, it felt like it was like bucking like a horse. In the middle of the night, she'd wake up and she'd feel like she was being
Like Exorcist style.
like extra style.
Wow.
And so she took to like sleeping on the floor. And the last night that she stayed there, she woke up and it was a wrought iron bed frame. And the foot of the bed frame was right next to her head, and she was on the other side of the room.
Shut up.
And she was like, I think that thing was trying to stomp my head. And I was just like, oh my God, whatever happened to it? So years later, I'm talking to a man who has in his possession this bed that he calls the deathbed. And he's like, I've got this bed, it's the deathbed. And he kind of like talks about this bed that he got out of the Hamilton Turner Inn. And I was like, why is it so weird? He's like, well, it's a wrought iron bed. And I was like, really? I have a friend who said that she slept on a wrought iron bed in the Hamilton Turner Inn. And he's like, did anything happen? He's like, yeah, it bucked. And he's like, yeah. He's like, well, it turns out that the bed frame, the headboard of the bed frame and the footboard were pulled up from a cemetery gate, a family gate, and turned into a bed.
Are you kidding me?
Super dope idea.
Yeah. Well, and I was like, okay. But yeah, they turned a family plot's wrought iron gate into a bed.
What in the world? What in the Savannah tarnation is that? Yeah.
Bro, that's crazy.
Oh my God.
That's wild.
These people are wild. If you ever wondered why Savannians are the way they are, goodness gracious.
Lord Jesus, it's a fire.
Yeah. Oh gosh. Well, that's horrifying, Never have been afraid of a bed before, but that's
there
a
you go.
new one.
Have we talked about the Pirate's House?
We have not.
Have we really?
Briefly,
Strangely enough,
I think
we mentioned it. Yeah,
I think it's time to tell a Pirate's House story or two, because
another wall person, another Wally.
We can't. Yeah, another Wally. I mean, honestly, we can't have a Savannah haunted podcast without at least having.
Without talking about the Pirate's House.
No,
I mean, the
come
Pirate's
on.
House is celebratedly haunted and usually at the top of most people's like things to see in downtown Savannah. Gotta go, gotta see. It's a difficult sell, the Pirate's House, because it has a dubious history. It was the site of the trustee's garden, and the whole concept of Savannah originally in its building was that they were going to have mulberry trees and get silkworms, and they were going to create a new silk route. But the humidity of Savannah was not conducive to silkworms. It didn't really help, and they couldn't get the crop that they wanted. So that whole area kind of fizzled out as the experimental gardens, and a person put up a tavern of sorts, and that tavern became a hot spot for pirates. The problem is Savannah's relationship with pirates is very hard to nail down. And, while Charleston has very dedicated records of all the pirate activity, and they did that incredible pirate purge in the early 1700s. Spoilers for anybody who's watching. Our flag means death. The truth of Savannah's pirates is still very clouded in mystery, because what we know, or what we tell, is that the pirate's house itself, a tavern where pirates would go, oftentimes they would Shanghai or take people through the tunnels towards the river, where they would put them on a ship, and when they woke up, when they came to, they were pirates. They were now out there.
Because Indeed did not exist back then.
No, Indeed. This was pirate recruiting 101. Yeah, it's like, how you feeling? You strong? Have a drink.
Yep.
Bonk. Take them out to the ship.
And that happened a lot. So.
And because the method of getting somebody onto the boat involved cracking them in the head, they get them drunk and then they hit them really hard. Many of those people didn't make it. And so the tunnel was, littered with bodies that didn't make it to the boat. You hit him too hard. It's like, I'm sorry.
I love your pirate voice.
I spent a lot of time working on my pirate voice.
It's excellent.
It's a solid pirate voice.
And so when I first came to Savannah, the story, and I think people probably still tell this story, is that it is haunted by Captain Flint, who is the captain who buried the treasure of Treasure Island. Oh. And Captain Flint, in the book Treasure Island, dies in the pirate house in Savannah. They actually say that he died. Oh. Yeah. Captain Flint died in the Savannah. He died in Savannah. And so that became like this big point. As a matter of fact, if you go to the pirate's house, you'll see like pages of Treasure Island on the wall, and the story being that Robert Louis Stevenson heard the stories of pirates and listened to them and knew about Savannah and the pirate's house. And, it's a big back and forth. And so he created the story, and the last words of Captain Flint was, bring aft the rum. Bring aft the rum, young Darby. Young Darby being the first mate. So bring aft the rum is something that people state they hear, being shouted in the upper rooms, because he died, sickly in one of the upper rooms. The problem was Captain Flint's not real. Captain Flint was a creation of Robert Louis Stevenson, which kind of creates a hiccup in the storytelling. However, it was a convalescence place. A lot of sailors probably died in that building. And to think that a pirate would call out for rum is not, without merit. So it comes back to us. It's like, which came first? The ghost or the ghost story? Were people telling the ghost story long enough for a ghost to just assume its position? Mm-hmm. Because it's kind of along the lines of saying, this place is, haunted by Mickey Mouse. And having people like, I saw a giant mouse. I saw these big round black ears over there. And he was like, yeah. So it is one of those things, but the building itself is so full of. And when I first moved here, you used to be able to go down into the pirate tunnels, but they had to shut it down because it was unstable. But they would let you take a good 6 to 10 feet into the tunnel, and you'd be like, "This is where they were saying hi." And I want to say when I went in, there was a plastic skeleton on the ground, which is like, that's I don't know.
I don't know.
I don't know. Is that a good idea?
That's interesting that people say they've seen him up in the upper areas, because I have seen a elderly man spirit up in the, I want to say it's like the window the furthest to the right.
That is the room.
Yep.
That is the room that everybody says that the captain died in.
Well, I don't feel like he would have been a captain because he looks kind of ragged. I've always thought he looked sickly and Well, the story of whoever it is this was long past his prime, long past his seafaring days, and he just drank himself to death in a bar where he could tell his old stories, and he lived in the boarding rooms upstairs and passed away. And what a lot of people don't realize is that on the same plot of land was St. Julian House. Because that house was moved from that area, on logs over to its current home on St. Julian Street. But people think that
that was a part of the haunting of that house too. Was that a lot of it was kind of like a place where sailors went, especially in like their retirement years, and especially when it was all coming to an end. And that raises all these questions too of what Savannah's relationship to pirates really was, because Savannah was founded in 1733, and that was kind of after what we consider to be the golden age of pirates. There are still pirates. There are plenty of pirates. Pirates are still a thing, and technically they started becoming privateers around that time. So the claims of Pirate House and being a pirate place, they're dubious because because people hearken to Blackbeard and all these things. But the truth of the matter is Blackbeard was dead for almost 20 years prior to Savannah's founding. And then Savannah's founding does not mark the actual Pirate's House building, because it used to be the greenhouse for the trustees' garden. So we're talking about even further away from the history of the pirates of the area. However, the mouth of the Savannah River being this huge inlet from the ocean, all of these places right there on a bluff where you could pull up a ship and anchor and be safe from prying eyes of the ocean. If the East India Trading Company is going up and down the Atlantic Ocean, they cannot see you on these little inlets. But these little inlets are huge enough for big ships to go into and hide.
Sure.
So this area is a dream for pirates. As a matter of fact, I think I've spoken about this on the podcast before, that the Treasure Island was called Salt's Island. Salt's Island was the actual name of the island itself was Salt's Island. It turns out that Oatland Island, its original name, was Salt Island.
Oh.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah. And it was like one of those things where it's like, how interesting. I wonder, in Robert Louis Stevenson talking these stories, was there a place where, and oddly enough, pirates didn't bury their treasure. That's kind of a myth of piracy, because they liked their treasure and they spent their treasure. They weren't like saving account. That's saving account. They weren't that keen on it. But what they would treasure is safety.
Yep.
What they would treasure is a place to hide, and what they would treasure is a home. So there is this notion. Yeah,
I just wanted a home.
And so Salt's Island, Oatland Island, has a lot of interesting stories to it that don't fit anything we know about it. But when I heard that, I was like, I wonder if the stories of Pirates of Savannah are far more cloaked in secret. And gosh, we talk about this a lot. Savannah, its history is a mystery. It is layered with things that they just didn't tell anybody. Yep. They were just like, no, let's not talk about it. Because, the big story of the Pirate's House and its success was Savannah's original prohibition was no hard alcohol. Mm-hmm. There was no hard alcohol in Savannah. There were no slaves in Savannah until the 1750s. It was against the law. No lawyers allowed in Savannah. And my favorite was, it was no hard alcohol, no lawyers, no slaves, and no Catholics. Were the four prohibitions of
no
Savannah.
Catholics?
Yeah, it was a thing.
It was just no Catholics.
No Catholics.
And the reason that they put was it makes men lazy.
Catholicism?
Yes, all those things make men lazy.
Okay. It's weird. It's a weird flex.
It's a weird take. It's a weird flex,
Yeah.
but it was one of those things where it's like people need to work and contribute to society. The society that they contribute to needs to be internal, not the church, not the, it doesn't make, it makes people not work for the good of each other.
Sure.
Mm-hmm. And very bizarre and strange, but that prohibition ended. But in that period of time, that's where rum running became this huge thing. And that's what I think the Pirate's House really represents, is the fact that when you put a prohibition on something, someone will always come up with a come around, with some way to get it done. And so the Pirate's House was a rum running house, and rum and pirates are intrinsically linked. Mm-hmm. And so that is where I think its most likely connection is. Where do you sell rum at a premium? So people were, pirates were bringing rum in to sell at a high cost, to people who couldn't get it.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yeah. Definitely.
What were you going to say?
I was going to say, basically, just to clarify, the Pirate's House was not a like friendly kind of tavern. You didn't want to go there. It was a very seedy place because a lot of times when you come to Savannah, they paint it in this way that is like, oh, it was a fun pirate tavern and like there's like lots of partying going on. It was not fun. It was dirty. It smelled horrible, and the people were rough. But they also have their own Wally kind of story.
Oh, yes, they do. Absolutely.
Basically, with the Shanghais and whatnot, they, like Chris said, didn't always go as planned. And also, there was a time where, like, the local law enforcement, that the very small little bit of it that they had, started picking up on people mysteriously disappearing from the Pirate's House. And so they went in one night to kind of just look around. And basically, they had already prepped this guy to go down through the tunnels. Like, they had already, like, drugged him, bonked him, all that, And they were stuck with this body, and they didn't want to get caught with a drunken, passed out guy. So they decided they were going to hide him into a secret wall compartment. But the issue is they never came back for him. And so he stayed in the wall, and he actually woke up at one point.
What?
Yeah, he woke up at one point so basically they were doing some kind of work on the wall or whatever. And again, another skeleton fell out of the wall because that happens a lot. And,
in Savannah?
Yeah, it happens a lot in Savannah. But they looked on the inside of the wood that would have been facing him, and there were scratch marks from him trying to claw his way out of the wall. And so, that's they have their own Wally. But
that's crazy.
That also is another reason of like, if you don't know how bad it would have smelled back then, the stench of a rotting body in the wall didn't stop anybody from going there. Yeah. So,
they've got rum.
They've got rum.
Are the tunnels that y'all are talking about, like, are they filled up?
So
yeah, everything's sealed off. I think
if you go down into the basement and I think they do let you go down there, you can see the ingress, but they did seal it.
Well,
and then the
outlet. All these things?
Because it's dangerous a lot of times.
It's very dangerous, and reckless people go running in.
Yeah.
Well, reckless people should be able to sign something and then go running in.
Yeah. But
you can't stop people from breaking in is the thing. And that's what happened to all the tunnels downtown. There used to be, when I first moved here, there were 3 major entrances. I've been down in tunnels in Savannah. They're all cemented in now. And I even went with a news reporter to the Historic Society to find the original maps. They were pulled. The original maps that show you
of course they were.
The entrance of the tunnels are not accessible to public. I think, official people can look at them. But like when you're just looking through the maps, you're not going to find the ones that are like, here was the egress to, because they were commerce tunnels.
Yeah.
So it was like, here's the entrance to the Broughton Street Tunnel. Here's the entrance to, because the Broughton Street Tunnel's entrance was in City Market. There was a City Market like caveat there.
Sure.
And it was like, oh, you just go in, you just climb in and go there. And the one thing I can say about the tunnels at the time, this was in the early 90s, I've never seen so many roaches in my entire life.
God.
Many roaches. Like literally the ground was like a moving carpet. And it was like, why? It was like, it's palmetto bugs.
Oh man, God. It's like the end of Creep Show.
Yeah. Yes, it was very much like that.
That's like one of my favorite like short films is the end of Creep Show.
That would have killed me. Quite literally. I'm very allergic to cockroaches, so that would have actually deceased me.
I'm going to make a promise to our listeners right now that if we can make this podcast big enough to where all 3 of us make a really, really good amount of money, enough to renovate those tunnels and open them back up to the public.
There's no renovation.
I will do it.
There's no renovation. They literally filled it with cement.
No, I know, but we will uncement it.
No,
and we will cement can be broken.
No, it can't. Because of the nature of how they did it. B, the rest of the tunnels are sewers. They were turned into the sewage system of Savannah.
Oh, you told me that.
Yes. Where do you think the toilet goes when you flush it?
All right, then the pirate's house. That's what we're doing.
We can probably
I'm gonna
actually
unseal the pirate's house for everybody.
Try to figure that out because I want to say somebody was in the planning stages of reinforcing the tunnel.
Yeah.
Because no one actually knows exactly where it goes.
Sure.
Because everyone supposes, like, if you went down, so. Sorry, this is going to be weird for anybody listening. Bay Street runs down and then goes like down a little bluff at the very far
on the
east end.
McIntosh
President Street.
Yeah.
Right into President Street. That is where the tunnel seemingly would come out. And if you look, you can actually see like brick wall and things like that. And so the story of it coming down to the river might be a little exaggerated. It might have just gone through the bluff, and then they carried it over where Bay Street is.
Got you close enough.
Yeah. But some people say that there was an elbow that went under East Broad.
And that's how they do it.
So it turned and went under East Broad, and then, because if you go down to River Street along Factor's Walk, you'll see many like doorways bricked up and many like arches bricked up. And they're like, that's what happened is you could go down, turn, and then come out on Factor's Walk, which is much closer to where the boats would have been.
Yeah.
Goodness gracious. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, if it's possible, I will do it.
That is a worthwhile investigation because I do think that those tunnels are probably intact.
Cool.
Yeah, I feel like they were just kind of blocked up, and that was
Yeah,
about it.
I want to say, like, if you go down, you should be able to see, because I think it's just wood. I think it's
Yeah.
just like a wooden wall inset, I think. I haven't been down there in ages.
All right. Tell me about the Mercer-Williams house. Is it haunted?
So there's legends of it being haunted. And a lot of people like to say it's Jim Williams that haunts it.
That's
Yeah.
It's not unlikely. It's not terribly unlikely. I mean, those
could see
two
a
deaths
residual
happened in that
haunting
house.
in the same
Danny
spot.
Hansford and Jim Williams both died in the same spot.
Wow.
And some people believe that Jim Williams was actually dusted. He was actually a voodoo death curse was put on him for exposing the voodoo culture around here.
Whoa.
Yeah.
I mean, and that's the underground whispery was that, and dusting is a terrifying thing. Apparently, it is a poison made of, I think, mushrooms, a variety of them. But you basically take it and you put it on doorknobs or you put it on something that the person would touch, and then over time it will seep in and it kills you in a manner that does not fully make sense. The toxology doesn't really come back, and I think the scariest thing is they say that they get children to do it. They like have children go and just like dust things, and no one suspects the child. Yeah, walking around and just like with a little handkerchief or something, and puts the dust on surfaces. And of course that is local legend. That's but I find it interesting because a lot of those reports of what actually killed Jim Williams, there's an argument about, was it a stroke? Was it a heart attack? Was it, pneumonia, I think was another one. But he did die like in the same room, in the same place as Danny Hansford.
It was really bizarre because he got out of jail because he got off on a technicality. And so he had been out of jail for 6 months at this point before he died. And it was just very bizarre that, he would end up falling, like literally collapsed in that same spot where Danny Hansford was shot by him. And so, spoiler alert, if you haven't read Midnight in the Garden of Good and Evil, sorry about that. If you haven't by now, it's, it's
but
been out.
You should if you really like Savannah.
It is a great interpretation of Savannah.
It is.
It gives you the flavor of Savannah.
And these are real people. And Jim
These
Williams,
are all real people. I've known several of the characters from the book in my time living here.
And Jim Williams was just an awful human being.
He was pretty terrible.
Yeah.
He was pretty terrible.
Like, I remember, this is just a side tangent, just to give you a little background of a local account of Jim Williams. One of our friends, a former coworker of mine, and also one of our former actors of the Savannah Underground, he's a elderly man, and his wife has worked at Clary's for most of her life. And so she told Richard that basically anytime Jim Williams would come in, nobody wanted to serve him. It was a fight of like, oh, you're going to have to take Jim, because he was just so nasty and so rude to people that nobody wanted to take his table. even though he obviously, was pretty wealthy, he did not tip well. And he was just so awful to the employees at Clary's that they were just like, absolutely not. So that's just a background of him. But regardless, it was so bizarre that he would die in the same spot, especially because there had been rumors of them being lovers or things like that. And so a lot of people like to think that because he took, or like because he claimed that he was being haunted by Danny, and things like that. And so some people like to say that Danny is the reason that he died, because he was like seeking revenge as a spirit almost. And so he's like, because you took my life, I'm going to take your life, and now you're going to have to haunt this place. That's the logic behind the haunting. But if you go to the Mercer-Williams house, and because Jim Williams' sister runs the home now, she will absolutely just not talk about anything. She doesn't want to talk about the murder. She doesn't want to talk about the movie or the book. She doesn't want to talk about, how he died, where he died, nothing of the sort. They will never say that it's haunted.
That's crazy because that's why everyone comes. And
exactly.
That's why everyone goes.
She hates it. She
hates it.
Yeah.
She hates it. She will shout at any tour
Wow.
that is there. That is all lies. These are all lies. Mm-hmm. And that's her prerogative. It is her home.
Yeah.
Wow.
And even so Jim Williams also had a story of the house that apparently before he moved in, because Jim Williams basically renovated houses. So he would move into a house and renovate them. And during the renovation process, he found out that a boy, had climbed to the roof of the house and fallen off of it and hit the fence, the wrought iron fence outside. And he literally would go outside to look for the broken piece of fence. And then he was like, this is where the kid fell. And he would tell this story often. And it's interesting because it was one of those, well, that feels urban legendy, but there is a newspaper article out there about the kid who, it was kids playing and the house was abandoned.
Yeah.
And so, they climbed up on the roof, they're playing on the roof, kid falls off the roof. Tragedy, absolutely. But definitely one of those things that's like, oh, this house is marked. Because Jim Williams also, the spirit that he claimed haunted him in the St. Julian Street house.
Yep.
He remarked as a giant bearded man. Mm-hmm. He said that bearded man followed him to the Mercer-Williams house, the Mercer house.
Huh.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And he would say that he could hear it like walking.
Yep.
On the roof, he thought, like in the attic or on the roof. And then one night he saw it like standing at the end of his bed, this big bearded man.
Yeah, Jim Williams' logic to handle a ghost was to sleep with a gun under his pillow. Not kidding. And I'm like...
He relied a lot on guns, didn't he?
Not just any gun, a Nazi Luger.
Yes.
What?
Yes.
He was a Nazi paraphernalia. That's another thing worth mentioning.
No.
He was the single largest private collector of Nazi paraphernalia in the world.
Yes.
So he had...
Not
so
because
many.
he was one, but because he found it interesting?
Hard to say.
It's really hard to tell.
But, I mean, I think the historical significance of it really did appeal to him. But, famously, they were filming a movie, and he didn't want his house to be shown, so he unfurled one of those giant swastika flags.
He did do that.
That like hung behind Hitler.
Yeah.
And his house is directly across from the Mikveh Israel synagogue, where many Holocaust survivors were. And it was like you could have hung anything. You could have hung anything, and it would have ruined the filming. But what you chose to hang was this giant swastika flag, and it was. I mean, I think there are postcards that you can probably find of pictures of that.
Yeah, it's in the book.
He was really this bad. Like this guy was really that bad.
Yes.
Also, I was about to say something nice about him, about how he did a great job. Being
he did a lot of historic preservation.
That's what I'm saying.
He did do.
He did a great job
and
at keeping Savannah.
He was an antique dealer of unparalleled. Faculties.
Absolutely.
He actually had the knife that stabbed Rasputin. The knife that stabbed Rasputin, and he used it as a letter opener.
God.
Bro.
This man, he was a character.
He was a character. And, of course, he very much wanted to be among the Savannah elite. And a lot of people will remark that he had Minerva, a voodoo priestess, work with him and counsel him on many, many things. And Minerva,
a black woman?
Yes.
Yes.
I don't know if he's Nazi. I don't know.
Well,
it's what he wanted was power.
Okay.
Yes.
What he wanted was power.
Sure.
Put that into context. But more so, a lot of people are like, well, everybody thinks that it's so weird that he had this voodoo priestess, but the truth was he was trying to be like the Savannah elite. All the Savannah elite have a voodoo, advisor. And I was like, that's a really interesting take, is that he was trying to keep up with the Savannians, because he was originally from Macon, and that excluded him from the class of Savannians. So there was a whole group of Savannians who looked down on him because he wasn't born in Savannah.
Wow, I didn't know that.
They're still like that. It's true.
Yeah, I've been here 30 years, and I'm a second-class citizen. So.
Yeah, I'm even less.
No. You're not less. We feel like this is our home, and plenty of people are nice to us.
Well,
I don't want people from Ohio listening to this being like, Savannah's not welcoming to anybody if you go and even live there.
Oh, no, it's very hospitable.
It's super hospitable. It's a great city.
But you're not a
Savannian. They don't consider us Savannians because we were not born here.
Who cares what they are? They the judge and jury? Absolutely not. I'm a Savannian.
They believe they are.
I wasn't born here. I don't care.
Anyways, but regardless, that is a different topic for a different day.
Conversation.
But yes, so Jim Williams, though, he is just a bizarre human being, and I wouldn't be surprised if he was still lingering, even just in a residual manner, in the home.
He was highly impactful.
Yes, because people do experience things in the Mercer-Williams house, but I don't know of any that are that could be because, of the family being like, keep it hush hush. If you do have something going on, I wouldn't be surprised if that's why I haven't heard more paranormal experiences come out of the Mercer-Williams house, but
it's very tight-lipped.
Yes.
And you can take a tour of the house.
I just don't mention anything that we just mentioned. When you take the tour,
that's very true.
That's what I mean. Yeah.
Yeah. Don't ask questions when you go there. Just you can keep it to yourself.
Yeah. Just know it happened.
Yeah.
And just wait, because people will ask, and it doesn't have to be you.
Yeah, it's true. It's true.
All right. I want to end out the episode with one more question. And I feel like the Victorian district doesn't get a lot of love. Like, we're so focused. Everyone is. It's not just us. It's so focused on the downtown area. Are there any good ghost story, any haunted houses in the Victorian district that because we have about 5-10 minutes left? Is there anything that comes to mind that you could tell a story about the Victorian district? And maybe we can have a full episode on the Victorian district.
There is a house on, I guess it's technically the Victorian district, 34th Street.
Yes.
So it's 34th and Barnard. So there's a house there.
Okay.
And basically, I want to say like a month ago, I had a guest come and take my tour, and he had moved away from Savannah, but that was the house he lived in. And he was like, I have to, again, people tell me their ghost stories unprovoked. And so this guy, he's like, I got to tell you about my house that I lived in. And I was like, okay, where's your house? And he was like, it was on 34th and Barnard. And all these wild things would happen where basically they would always hear people running throughout the halls. They'd hear screaming. They would feel people push them or pull on their clothes, pull hair, things all like that. And he would always see this woman in the house and whatnot. And he's like, the house was crazy. And so I decided to look into it some more. And he found out that in the 80s, I want to say, or the 70s, one of the two, a woman was murdered inside the home. And he's like, I think it's her. And she is so angry that people are there living in a house that was so awful, where this awful thing happened to her, that she's been trying to push people out ever since. The oddest thing, though, was 2 weeks after this man told me this, I have two guests who are locals who were, again, unprovoked, tell me their ghost story. I'm not kidding. This happens to me weekly. And so she was like, yeah, I came to take this tour because I wanted to learn more about ghosts because we live in a haunted house. And I was like, oh, okay. Well, I'm like, do you live in Savannah? And she was like, yeah, we live over off of 34th Street. And I was like, oh my God. And she's telling me, and it was uncanny, the exact same experiences that the man 2 weeks before told me. And I was like, your house isn't off of Barnard Street, is it? And she's like, yes, it is. I'm like, well, I hate to be the one to tell you this. But there was a woman who was murdered in your house back in the 80s or 70s, because again, I can't remember which one it was, and she was like, that would make so much sense, because ever since we've moved in, it felt like there was a woman, we'd see this woman, and it felt like she didn't want us there. So I feel like that's a story. That's the only reason why I know that story, is because for some reason I'd have the two homeowners come to see me in a
very
2 week succession.
So that area is strife with violence, because in the 80s, in the 70s and 80s, on 32nd Street, right in that generalized area, was basically a drug kingpin of Savannah. And he lived there, and the police used to like work for him, basically. And they would, the story would be that he would sit on his porch on 32nd Street, and police would cruise by, roll down their window, and he will throw a $20 bill wrapped around a silver dollar from his porch into their car, and they would go and have lunch and just leave business be business. But he used a lot of force to scare neighbors out and fill his little community with his lieutenants. He gave homes to all of his, associates. And so I do remember that there were at least 3 murders linked, but the investigations went nowhere. And it was like, why did the investigations go nowhere? And then we learned that, and when I was working for the Savannah Morning Press, we were like uncovering this story bit by bit, where there was apparently a cadre of police that were like in league with this one guy on 32nd Street. So that's interesting. I wonder if that's one
it
of the
probably
stories.
was. I mean, if it's around the same area, I wouldn't be surprised. But yeah, so that happens very often, that people will move into a place and find out that somebody was killed inside their house, or their house was involved in something of that nature, especially during the 80s, because Savannah was rough.
It was rough.
At a period of time.
It was very rough.
Especially during a certain drug lord's reign.
Yes, that's very true.
We won't mention
We won't
it.
name well, no naming names, but yes. And what's interesting is even the most famous drug lord, quote unquote, was actually an underling. The people who operated and kind of organized all of Savannah's crime, they're very hands off, and they're very hard to nail down or prosecute. So yeah, it was the Wild West. Yeah. It absolutely was. Even like I moved to Savannah in the early night, like 92, 93. But that put in motion, we were at the tail end of it. And like right now, if you go to Broughton Street, it's like a mall. Back then, if you went to Broughton Street, there was a point at which you just didn't go because you could get shot. And there used to be nightly gunfights across the street. I think it was called like the Unicorn Club and Tropical Paradise, maybe. There were 2 nightclubs, and they used to shoot at each other across the street of Broughton, and it was just a common thing that people from one nightclub would shoot at people at the other nightclub.
Good Lord. But yeah, so that woman was like, I'm glad to know who the woman is, but she's like, of course, we bought the murder house. And so yeah, but thank you guys so much for listening to this. If there was any house that we didn't cover that you want us to talk more about, definitely shoot us over suggestion. Also, make sure to send us those stories if you have them. We definitely want to read those and do live reactions to them. So definitely, if you have a story, send it on over. But with that, thank you guys again. My name is Madison Timmons.
I'm Chris Susi.
And stay spooky, y'all.